Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle, part 15. So, last time we were here, we were working on chapter 2 from the Gian J Quasar book, and we will be continuing that chapter today. I hope you're all doing well out there. So we have chapter 2 here, which is covering a lot of the missing planes, and we will be getting into more of that today. And let me check here real quick. Oh yeah. This is the long chapter. One of the longer ones. We'll see if we'll do 25. If we do 25 pages, I'll be impressed. But I do want us to cover a good portion of this. If we break chapter 2 into a third part, I wouldn't really mind doing that. But it's about the content here. So just as much as we can digest, that's what we'll do. Alright? So let's carry on here. Again, this slideshow is of the Illuminaut, which has done deep sea exploration around the Bermuda Triangle area. And as I've said before, it did find an ancient road on the seabed. So I think that's very noteworthy here. But be sure to drop a like, comment in the chat if you're here, let me know you're watching. It's always good to have a little bit of chit chat back and forth. Any questions you might have that pertains to the discussion here, I'll gladly read them on air, and yeah, we'll just go from there. We'll wing it for this chapter of missing planes. All right. So let's continue on with chapter 2. On December 21st, 1952, a Curtiss C-46 cargo flight disappeared at night in the same area. In the same area as, I believe, is the NC 16002 that we were reading from last episode last week. It disappeared from the same area with apparently equal suddenness with its crew of 3 after the pilot signaled that he was descending from 8,000 feet to 6,000 feet en route to land at Miami. The weather had been perfect, and the pilot was within sight of the coastlines. Possibly one of the most tragic disappearances in the Triangle happened to Flight 441 on October 30th, 1954. This was a huge Lockheed 4-engine Super Constellation airliner in military transport service, designated an RV or an R7V-1. It was carrying 42 passengers, all of them family of U.S. Navy servicemen overseas. Everything indicates that the flight encountered nothing unusual. Its messages were routine from its base of Patuxent River, that's spelled Patuxent, N-A, and then it's the Patuxent River, N-A-S, Maryland. And the messages were received as far as Bermuda, where it would pass northward on its course to Lajes, L-A-J-E-S, and that is in Azores, A-Z-O-R-E-S, where it subsequently determined to have inexplicably disappeared by lack of radio messages thereafter. Its cargo adds another peculiar aspect to the mystery. It was carrying 5 life rafts, 111 life jackets, 46 exposure suits, pillows, and 660 paper cups. An intensive search found no bodies, no parts of the plane or cabin paneling, nor any sign of its very floatable cargo. And the author put in parentheses an exclamation point after the 111 life jackets. It was carrying 42 passengers, and it had 111 life jackets, so they had much more than what they needed. The final conclusion of the Naval Board of Inquiry perhaps best summarizes what can be said of any missing airplane in the Bermuda Triangle. Quote, "It is the opinion of the board that R7V-1 BUNO 128441 did meet with a sudden and violent force that rendered the aircraft no longer airworthy and was thereby beyond the scope of human endeavor to control. The force that rendered the aircraft uncontrollable is unknown." End quote. Among the most astounding disappearances of military aircraft is that of Pogo 22. That's P-O-G-O 22. An 8-engine Boeing B-52 on October 14th, 1961. This was the first time a jet aircraft appeared in the Triangle. Operating out of Seymour Johnson AFB in North Carolina, along with 5 other B-52s. Pogo 22, which is its squadron name, was participating in Sky Shield 2, a secret Cold War maneuver for strike deterrent preparedness. Its return trip to base was a large arc extending from Nova Scotia to Bermuda. A large arc extending from Nova Scotia to Bermuda, where the 6 B-52s split up to a 10-mile lateral separation and headed west for base. Pogo 22 was last seen by its, quote, white cell, end quote, partner, Pogo 13, when 3 miles distant during the separation. So Pogo 13 was 3 miles from the Pogo 22. The other 5 B-52s cruised into base on schedule, with the exception of Pogo 22. An immediate search by Coast Guard cutters, Navy destroyers and cruisers, and C-130 Hercules planes, not to mention all the civilian vessels in the vicinity, covered 280,000 square miles of sea, roughly twice the area of California. Did you get that? They covered 280,000 square miles of sea, roughly twice the area of California. And they found nothing. Wreckage from a B-52 normally should not be hard to locate, since this type of aircraft is 160 feet long, has a 186-foot wingspan, and is 40 feet high. It also vanished within a very specified route heading toward the coast, at all times only 10 miles away from Pogo 13. Any explosion would have been seen, and any ditching would have been preceded by a mayday, no matter how terse. Perhaps a simple explanation for this aircraft's disappearance can be found. However, its last location in the triangle is in itself a disquieting coincidence with the others. Hey Texas Learny. Hey Andres. Good to see you both here. Welcome to the chat, welcome to the stream. We're doing this live today on Wednesday instead of the usual Thursday. So this will only be for this week, it'll be Wednesday. But thanks for being here. So yeah, we have this B-52 military airplane that disappeared without a mayday. The search and rescue covered area that is twice the size of California state. Found nothing. And this aircraft was 160 feet long with a 186-foot wingspan and is 40 feet high. And there was no mayday. A KB-50 aerial tanker with the squadron handle of, quote, Tyler 41, end quote, disappeared next in the same area on January 8th, 1962. This large 4-engine aircraft, a design based on the B-29 bomber, carried large quantities of fuel for mid-air refueling. About an hour after it took off from Norfolk, Virginia, carrying 8 crew, the following message was picked up. Quote, "This is Tyler 41. I am at 37 degrees, 15 feet north latitude, 70 degrees west longitude at 12:17 p.m. My flight level is 23,000 feet. I am flying on instruments, heading 085 degrees. My ground speed is 385 miles per hour. Endurance is 11 plus hours. My destination is La Haye. I'm estimating 37 degrees, 30 feet north latitude, 65 degrees west longitude at 1 p.m., and 37 degrees, 35 feet north latitude, 60 degrees west longitude next. I request that you relay this to New York Oceanic Air Control. Hey, Jason H., good to see you in the chat. Appreciate having you all here live. It's good. It's good feeling here. A peculiar radio communication void preceded the KB-50 disappearance as well. The 1 p.m. estimated time of arrival mentioned would place it in the triangle almost due north of Bermuda. When they reached this area, Tyler 41 made several unsuccessful attempts to contact, quote, Harmon Control, end quote, on the east coast of the United States to inform them that they were on course and schedule. Then, for the next 15 minutes, they tried to contact other stations along the U.S. East Coast with equal lack of success. Knowledge of this comes from a Navy transport plane approximately 1 hour behind, also en route to the Azores. They attempted to relay Tyler 41's messages, but encountered the same lack of response. At 1:20 p.m., both gave up and continued on their course. However, when the Navy transport landed without incident at Les Azores, they were informed that Tyler 41 was overdue. Though traveling behind her on the identical course, they had not seen anything indicating a horrific explosion, nor did they receive a mayday indicating trouble. According to Comestaria and Camus Foraz, the Air Force's various command areas, 162 search and rescue sorties were flown in a combined 1,369 flight hours by the U.S. Air Force alone, with an additional 7 sorties and 49 search hours by the U.S. Navy, and 23 sorties in 236 hours by the U.S. Coast Guard. This is how much time they spent looking for this aircraft. So frustrating was the lack of trace that 5 Coast Guard cutters, one abreast from the other, sailed the entire flight track of the KB-50 from Langley to the Azores. A 412-hour search covering 440,820 square miles of the Atlantic. To date, the most extensive search for any lost plane or ship. Quote, no trace of any survivors or wreckage was ever found. End quote. The investigation concluded, quote, thus preventing the accident board from obtaining any physical evidence upon which to base their investigation. End quote. Incredible. So that's like 2 Californias worth of land square mileage searchage in the Atlantic. Only 5 months later, on May 27th, 1962, a huge C-133 cargo master left Dover, Delaware for Les Azores. In this case, the bizarre nature of its disappearance was verified by radar. The pilot, James Allen Higgins, had just rogered reaching 17,000 feet altitude. Minutes afterward, at precisely 9:25:50 a.m., the C-133 vanished from the scope. The search, concentrating in this area, at first found nothing. But eventually, a nose wheel was found and retrieved. Examination of the tire by the FBI lab revealed minute particles of aluminum, steel, plywood, and paint chips embedded in the rubber. So they found a nose wheel and it had all of this stuck inside of it. A pathetic cross-section, molecularly speaking, of all that the cargo master had been, along with its 50,000 pounds of cargo consisting of crates, boxes, bags, machinery, etc., though now unusually disintegrated. So this oh, unreal. So this plane disintegrated and all they could find was a wheel with embedded particles of the ship. I guess you call it an airship. I keep calling it a ship. It's an airship, really, with how big these planes are. The lab also found a, quote, magnetic particle, end quote, but added that, quote, no significance is attached to the presence of the very small magnetic particle, end quote. Yeah, I don't believe that one for a second. Although they admitted they did not know what it was. So you have to read between the lines here with some of these reports. Yeah, Texas, it's supposed to have a black box. A lot of these disappearances, the black boxes don't even survive. They disappear along with the planes and the ships. That's another big mystery about all of this. When you have a plane that is so big, carrying 50,000 pounds of cargo, and all you find is a wheel that has bits of aluminum and wood and it just says aluminum, steel, plywood, and paint chips embedded in the rubber. And the cargo master was much larger than that. Just that one tiny wheel they found. But that's all they found was a wheel. No black box. Tests also concluded that no explosive material was found on the wheel. This is just one case of a huge aircraft suddenly disintegrating for no apparent reason. As a final mystery, this C-133 was carrying 85,000 pounds of fuel, most of which had not been expended yet. But no oil slicks were located. So these planes are just up on disappearing from the face of this reality. It's just phased out. Not even the oil is safe. No jet fuel is safe. That disappears too. There's no trace of it in the water. By a disturbing coincidence, another C-133 disappeared from radar in the same location more than a year later, on September 22nd, 1963. I kind of want to look up what a 133 actually looks like here. Oh, there's a big sucker. Alright, let me capture an image of this. We'll bring it into the show here. So a C-133 airliner. There you go. We'll keep that up for the time being. Unreal. So the whole thing disappeared. The front wheel was found. All the cargo, all the fuel. Don't know where it went, says all the reports. Didn't find it looking at the size of 2 states of California worth of water area. Alright, so let's continue here. This is going to be talking about a second plane of the same model that also disappeared a little over a year later. So, September 22nd, 1963, after leaving Dover. Before it vanished, there was unusual electronic interference noted by the radar return. So something was making it spaz out. The operator had trouble picking it up on his scope, so he requested that the pilot indent, that is, turn on a signal that makes an SIF, or a selective identification feature, appear on a controller's scope to magnify an aircraft's image. Radio reception was also unusually poor for this time of early morning, and for the flight being so close to such major hubs of air traffic as New Jersey and New York. Pilot Dudley Connolly's reply was faint. Quote, "Roger, Roger," end quote. Nonetheless, no such SIF amplification of the return ever showed on the controller's scope. At 2:55 a.m., Connolly was heard to say, quote, "For your information, we're 30 miles out of the sea isle on the 138 radial," end quote. To which New York responded, quote, report reaching 14,000, end quote. Connolly's last words were, quote, "Roger, Roger," end quote. Only 5 minutes later, the C-133 blip vanished from the scope. For the second, wow. Just like in an instant. Boom. Gone. For the record, this C-133 was carrying 48,593 pounds of cargo and 88,000 pounds of fuel. This time the search found absolutely nothing. So not even a landing wheel like the previous plane of the same make and model. The second one they found nothing of it. Not a single trace of it at all. If the disappearance of this last C-133 received little publicity, it was because in the month before, on August 28th, 1963, an incredible disappearance involving 2 KC-135 jet Strato tankers engrossed the press. So we're going to find a photograph of that one as well to share, just so we have reference. And so the news media went ahead and used this other plane, as their media whatever, right? Give me 1 second here. We'll get this one up as well. So there's that one. That is the KC-135 jet stratotanker. And it's being refilled in this photograph. Hold on a second. Let me just confirm this. So it's being refilled by a KC-135R. So am I reading that right? It might be the smaller one in this image here. So alright, let's just make it bigger. Why not? Yeah, it has to be this bigger one. But both of them are... No, so the one refueling it on the bottom is the F-15 Eagle. So that's correct. So while multiple C-133s, the silver one, went missing, the KC-135 jet stratotanker, this big one here, this is a Boeing one. This one is the one that made it to the news. Okay. So we'll just keep this up for now. I'm trying to run this with OBS Studio. I'm running into a few hiccups here, but nothing too... nothing unmanageable, you know. Okay, so let's continue reading. Flying in formation on a return trip to Miami from a point about 300 miles southwest of Bermuda, they disappeared. Apparently simultaneously, so there were two of these, by the way. While maintaining about a mile separation in flight, with the lead aircraft at 36,000 feet and the other 500 feet lower. A massive search was launched after they failed to arrive at Homestead Air Force Base. And we know who lives by Homestead, right? Adley Skolnich. The search finally located debris identified as coming from one of them. Then days later, debris from the other nearby. But it remained mysterious how they could have collided in midair. So let me reread this. The search finally located debris identified as coming from one of the two planes. Then days later, debris from the other nearby. But it remained mysterious how they could have collided in midair. We will see later, however, other incidents where planes suddenly slowed or changed altitude for no reason, possibly explaining some of the mysteries still surrounding these two stratotankers. The June 5th, 1965 disappearance of a C-119 flying boxcar contains more unexplained radio quirks that serve only to deepen the mystery surrounding it. Shall we show on screen what a C-119 looks like here? Why not? We've been doing all the other ones here. Ready for this? This is the C-119 flying boxcar. This Air Force utility took flight from the Homestead Air Force Base south of Miami with 10 crew and headed toward its destination of Grand Turk Island, where it was to drop off engine parts for another C-119 that had lost an engine and made an emergency landing the day before. Shortly after takeoff at 7:47 p.m., Major Louis Giuntoli, spelled Giuntoli, informed Miami that he was picking up the, quote, Yankee route, unquote, at 9,000 feet altitude and would follow this air highway all the way to Grand Turk. Giuntoli's last transmission at 10:03 p.m. was from the last check-in point on this route, designated Yankee 2, roughly 200 miles from Grand Turk. What is strange is that he was not picked up by any local control, several of which ring the area, nor any of the other aircraft flying in the vicinity, nor by Miami, which was expecting the call. He was picked up by New York some 1,300 miles away, as if nearer there than to the Bahamas. They in turn informed Miami. So this is really fascinating. This plane goes in and all of a sudden their radio signal's being picked up by New York as if it's over there. And this has happened with other planes before that we've read in this book, where their location kind of just shifts. Like they phased into another part. There's no explanation for it either. And I'm just going to look up real quick this Homestead Air Force Base, because I did hear about it before. But I want to know how close this is over by Ed's Castle. Give me a moment here. It's just what we have to work with. Alright, Homestead, and then we got Coral Castle. 12 minutes away. Look at that. Here's Coral Castle. Let me bring this in a little bigger here. Check that out. There's the Air Force Base on the right-hand side. Trying to make this as big as I can. I'm gonna go full screen momentarily. "12 miles, or 12 minutes away, 4.8 miles from Coral Castle to Homestead Air Force Base." Can't make that up. And then for further reference, you can see where it's at according to Miami here. And then you just have the Everglades. There's just like no development whatsoever. And then New York picked up the signal for some reason. So what's going on with that? You know, I'm actually wondering if Ed Leeds Skolnick relocated from Florida City to Homestead so we could be closer to an Air Force base. It's just something to think about. Okay, let's continue reading here. When the boxcar failed to arrive in the next hour, a full, though fruitless search was launched. An examination of the weather provided no clue. Quote, "After a thorough investigation of the synoptic situation and evaluation of numerous pilot debriefings, it has been determined that the weather between Yankee 2 and Grand Turk at the time and altitude that C-119 was in the area was VFR, or visual flight rules, with no apparent hazards." So they had clear weather. Clear weather, and the radio signal was picked up from New York. They were supposed to be coming into land in Homestead, south of Miami. Although the disappearance of Flight 19 is the first recorded disappearance attributed to the Bermuda Triangle, a number of aircraft, mostly military, had vanished during the war years. These remained unknown because documentation for those lost during the war was not available until more recently. The most surprising of these involved several PBY Catalinas, amphibians that can land on water should trouble arise. One with 9 Free French crew left Norfolk, Virginia on July 27th, 1944 and disappeared. Another went missing off St. Augustine, Florida on February 21st, 1944. 2 others were lost in the Gulf June 5th, 1942. And also on October 2nd, 1943, with combined crews of 18. The situation, like, this just keeps on stacking up on top of itself. Unreal. Sometimes dates are not even given, but location is. Like another Catalina with 11 crew that left San Juan and disappeared, with only a few, quote, minor parts found, end quote. Numerous Avengers and Douglas Dauntlesses have vanished, like one that went missing off NAS Norfolk March 7th, 1943 with 3 aboard. I'm trying to be as thorough as possible with showing reference images today on the fly, because I wasn't planning on showing images of all these aircraft, but I think it's worth showing here. Like this guy. This is the Douglas. Dauntless. So one of these had 3 aboard that went missing March 7th, 1943. A Dauntless went missing east of NAS Miami at night on September 11th, 1944. Another one vanished about 40 miles east of Fort Lauderdale on March 6th, 1945. And these are all happening during World War II, mind you. We got another one here. A Lockheed Ventura. Alright. So this one, a Lockheed Ventura, disappeared July 10th, 1943, while itself on a search mission with 5 crew out of Guantanamo, Cuba. Another Ventura, on convoy cover duty out of Trinidad, vanished with 6 crew on November 13th, 1943. Yet another Ventura was on a search mission September 7th, 1943, and went missing with 6 crew. And another Lockheed Ventura with 5 crew disappeared August 7th, 1943, believed shot down by an enemy sub. See how this just keeps adding up? There's more here, though. There's a lot more. PBM Mariner. PBM Mariners lost on routine and training patrols have included one on July 10th, 1945, while over the Bahamas on night patrol with 12 crew. Only a few days later, on July 18th, a Navy privateer also vanished over the Bahamas while on routine patrol, and a B-24 Liberator on a ferry flight near Bermuda was lost February 7th, 1945. So real quick, I'm going to clear up these images here and get us back to the Illuminati. Alright. How y'all doing out there, by the way? Get a check from everyone in the chat here. Just looking at all of these different planes that disappeared, it's good reference to have them up here for all of you to see, but I enjoy looking at what we're talking about as well. Awesome, Texas. Thanks for the check-in. Alright, we got 3 more pages and then a map. We got about 20 pages left in the chapter. And we're not even, we're almost an hour in. Got through like 6 pages here. This is nuts. But this is really dense information here. We're covering all of this, analyzing it, giving commentary. So I'm trying my best here to keep it interesting and informative. But all of this is just hurts my head sometimes. Post-war losses include a Grumman Hellcat off Key West, Florida on November 27th, 1950, a Grumman F9F2 Panther jet after leaving New Jersey September 11th, 1950, and a Lockheed Texan after leaving Cherry Point, North Carolina on December 5th, 1953. While smaller civilian aircraft have disappeared since the 1940s as well, these events have been obscured by ruined records before 1964, or, in the case of the military records above, remain unindexed and will one day be relocated or extracted with more pertinacious research. Records for aircraft accidents show that roughly 4 aircraft vanish on average every year. So that's just the average. Pick any given year and there's about 4 that go missing. There is no overall model or make affected. So this is across the board. Any type of aircraft, military or private, it's all that. Not one is favored over the other in terms of these disappearances. The only similarities are the location, lack of radio reports or confused reports, and the lack of wreckage. This last point strikes a disquieting chord because many of the planes vanished over shallow water. So it's not like they just nosedived into the ocean and hit the seabed and nobody could find them. This was like in... They say shallow water, I assume it's also swimmable. So the ocean bed's not too far down for them to find these craft if they were to actually find them, and they can't find them. Andreas says, well, it's definitely weird, and why the hell is the resources going to, if not another unknown party? No, so you're still here. Yes, thank you, thank you. Why the hell is the resources go to, if not another unknown party? Yeah, I don't think this is like a human influenced event. Or at least people living in this realm, they're not making these planes disappear. I don't think that's what's happening here. Like when we talk about disappear in this series, it means absolutely gone. Not it went hiding under the ocean somewhere and you can play hide and seek. No, this is just straight up gone. No debris. A lot of these just nothing. Not even fuel left behind. Like they were saying earlier in this chapter. No oil slick on the ocean. Just zapped out of existence. On February 8th, 1964, a twin-engine Piper Apache in charter service with pilot and 3 passengers disappeared between West Palm Beach, Florida, and Grand Bahama. I think it's Apache. I don't know why I said Apache. Apache, tomato. No, I think it's Apache. December 5th, a Cessna 140 with 2 persons vanished off New Smyrna Beach, Florida. A Cessna 182, a high-wing, reliable aircraft often used for aerial scouting and pleasure flighting, disappeared over the crowded Florida Keys while en route from Marathon to Key West with pilot and passenger aboard October 31st, 1965. So you have to think about this. The Florida Keys, it's a vacation destination. There's a lot of islands there, but that's also due to the sea level rising. All of that area used to have, there's a star fort underneath the water there, and there's roads like in that whole area was probably above water at one point, but today it's all tourist destination. There's people out across all of those islands able to look up in the sky and see these small range planes. So for it to disappear over the Keys is even more bizarre. December 29th, 1965, a Piper Cherokee took off from Caicos Island, heading for San Juan, Puerto Rico, with pilot and 2 passengers. It went missing. Yeah, no worries, Andres. So sorry about the wording and fingers moving faster than my brain. Don't worry. It's all good. I got an idea of what you were trying to ask, I think. Like, they used a lot of resources to do search and rescue missions for all of these. And I know a lot of I would figure that the military aircraft had a lot more of the resources available to look. And just the man hours involved. It's just, there's so much involved here. People spent their time looking for these craft and they couldn't find them, using all the technology available to them at the time. A rather unusual disappearance of a cargo plane took place April 5th, 1966, carrying a decidedly non-hazardous load of frozen chickens. The aircraft, a converted B-25 Mitchell bomber with the civilian tail mark of N92877, was headed from Fort Lauderdale to Aruba and then to South America. The last radio report indicated it was somewhere over the tongue of the ocean, the deepest water in the central Bahamas. Thereafter, however, the expected routine radio contact never came from the pilot, Gian J. An exhaustive search found no trace. Texas Learning says maybe the crafts were exactly where they are meant to be, and we aren't supposed to know about it. There's that too. I'm open to discussion on all of this. If we look into the Philadelphia experiment with the ship that vanished and came back, I would have to say these planes are going into another dimension. Where are they going? They're going into like a mirror universe? Like, who knows what's happening? Are they still alive? That's my question. They living their best life on the other side of the veil? These are legit questions after seeing everything that they exhausted all of their search and rescue resources. There's no blips on the radar. They just vanished. There's no trace of these planes. The radio signals are picked up way up north, 1,300 miles away from where they're supposed to be. It's like something's picking the plane up and moving it. But then also it's taking it off the physical map and putting it on a different map. Like a parallel map. It's like pulling it to the underworld, so to speak. Like, who knows what it's doing? If there's like a mirror reality, this could be where these planes are going. And this is probably one of the more positive explanations, because that means that these people didn't pass away tragically. Disappearances are sometimes disturbingly frequent. In the first week of January 1967, 3 aircraft vanished. The first one, a Chase YC-122, was lost January 11th between Fort Lauderdale and Bimini, with 4 persons aboard, while carrying supplies for an Ivan Tors movie shoot. The last name is spelled Tors. The second was on January 14th, when Dr. R. Van Westerborg and his friends took off in his Beechcraft Bonanza from Key Largo, south of Miami, and disappeared over shallow water. The last, on January 17th, was a Piper Apache en route from San Juan, Puerto Rico to St. Thomas, piloted by an extremely qualified pilot, John Walston, spelled Walston, who was carrying 3 passengers. Yeah, Texas, I'm just speculating here too. I mean, ultimately, we've said on this channel before, everything happens for a reason. Everybody's where they're supposed to be. So, while these pilots may not have planned for these disappearances, perhaps they were always meant to happen. It's almost like we're still waiting for them to come back in a way. Wouldn't it be wild if these... So here I'm speculating some more here. Wouldn't it be wild if some of these planes eventually came back and popped back up on the radar decades later? And for them it feels like they never left? They still think it's the 1960s? It's not out of the realm of possibility. Texas says, I have heard about underwater cults, but those were surrounding Africa. Not sure if I should connect these dots, but it's curious. Hey, I don't have anything off the table at this point. Although if I were to guess right now, I'd say similar to what I don't know if it was Charles Berlitz's book that said it, that the now underwater city of Atlantis may have had a magnetic generator of some sort that is still just randomly powering off here and there. And that's why this is limited to location and not limited to the types of planes, because any plane flying over can be susceptible to this phenomenon. So it's it's a landlocked phenomenon, if that makes any sense. This is happening in part due to the land that is underneath these areas of sea, but I also believe the water has something to do with this too. But we're talking about planes that are going missing at different altitudes Does it matter if it's 50,000 feet in the air, 30,000 feet, 10,000 feet? Any flight path that they're taking, it seems like they're susceptible to being vanished. So I'd say, speculating here, that there's some technology that's unknown to us, that's even unknown to our governments and military, but they may have a better idea of it than us. But there's some unknown technology that is causing this phenomenon. It could be a combination of magnetics and sound. But like, we're talking about like just complete up disappearance of physical objects. Like, so I don't think that's the full explanation what I'm giving here. Andreas says, read about crystals underwater misfiring from the lost city, like you're saying. Yes. And Texas says, or at least that's what we're being told. Yeah. Like, my speculation is just based off of these other readings that we've been doing here, along with the energy grid deep dive with Coral Castle. Which Coral Castle's, 4.8 miles away from Homestead Air Force Base, which some of these planes were supposed to have landed at and they didn't. There's a bigger connection to all of this than just being around Florida. I guess that's something we could all agree with solidly here for today. Alright, let's continue reading here. We'll read a few more. I think we'll get up to this map and diagram, and then we'll save the last 15 pages for next week, because this is a large chapter, and I don't want to burn out in the middle of this while we're reading. I like keeping these streams a little shorter now so that I don't burn out, so I don't just start getting slower as I'm going along here. Alright, continuing on. Though these received a lot of attention in the press and later contributed to this period being dubbed Black Week, they were only 3 out of total 8 disappearances in 1967 alone. The others received little, if any, attention, among them a Cherokee that vanished July 2nd near Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, with 4 occupants. Another Piper Cherokee in the short span between Miami and Bimini, about 50 miles, on August 6th, carrying 3 people. And yet another Piper Cherokee between Great Inagua Island, Inagua, and San Juan, Puerto Rico on October 3rd. Great Inagua is the most common halfway rest and refueling point for flights heading from Florida toward Puerto Rico and vice versa, thus ruling out fuel exhaustion as a possible cause in the last case. When getting lost on this route, I gotta pick a way to pronounce this word. I heard it say route, and I just said route. I think it's route, but route is what I've been saying here on this channel. When getting lost on this route, one can easily find land at Hispaniola to the south. Yet no trace of the aircraft was found, and no mayday was received. Although it is still easier to get lost on long overseas routes, as in the above cases, it is not likely on short routes, as in the case of a Cessna 182 that disappeared November 8th over shallow water between Georgetown, Great Exuma, Bahamas, and Nassau, Bahamas, carrying the pilot and 3 passengers. Lastly, a Cherokee with 4 persons aboard went missing November 22nd in the vicinity of Cat Island, Bahamas. On May 29th, 1968, a Cessna 172 vanished around Grand Turk Island with 2 persons aboard after the pilot shouted over the mic, quote, "Engine quit," end quote. And that's with an exclamation point. So his engine just shut off. This incident was sensationally revisited a year later when another Cessna 172, same exact model, this one with the tail mark N8040L, vanished June 6th, 1969, after a chain of confusing radio messages. The pilot, Carolyn Coscio, spelled Coscio, accompanied by her boyfriend, Richard Rosen, was trying to find Grand Turk to refuel and then head to Kingston, Jamaica. When she should have been at the island and requesting approach instructions, she radioed instead that she was lost and was circling 2 deserted islands, and that her navigational equipment could not detect the Grand Turk homing beacon. That's some scary stuff. Being lost by 2 deserted islands you're supposed to be making contact to land. In desperate tones, she finally transmitted, quote, "Is there any way out of this?" End quote, before she disappeared. A full search found no trace despite calm seas. 6 other aircraft disappeared in 1969, most of them twin-engine aircraft with skilled pilots. In none of these incidents did the pilots send any mayday. Though even if they had lost an engine, there should still have been ample time to do so before ditching. 2 of them were along an identical course, Great Inagua to San Juan, while the others were among busy routes, well within range of several flight unit facilities. A Piper Comanche disappeared while flying or overflying the Bahamas on November 23rd, 1970, en route from West Palm Beach to Kingston, Jamaica. On December 20th, 1973, a particularly surprising disappearance involved a lake amphibian, an aircraft designed to land on water. Between Nassau and Bimini, a route mostly over shallow water. Nevertheless, the plane vanished with its 3 occupants. While many planes have vanished on long routes, the disappearances have nevertheless primarily been focused and confined to the Bahamas, an area that consists of hundreds of islands and some of the shallowest ocean depths in the world, thousands and thousands of square miles being the Great Bahama Bank, with an average depth of only 50 feet and often as shallow as 5 or 7 feet. This latter depth covers many square miles, even far from any visible land. So do you understand that? Like, this water just continues to be shallow, well past any visible land. And it's only 5 to 7 feet. It's just like a swimming pool depth, really. Very shallow swimming pool depth. Of all the disappearances, the most unusual have been those lost on short routes between the Bahamas and Florida. Unusual because the element of suddenness is inescapable in any conclusion. Often the routes are so short that a plane is at its cruising altitude for only minutes before descending. These short routes are usually crowded with other air and sea traffic, a battery of potential witnesses and rescuers. And the hundreds of islands and their beaches make potential repositories for debris. Yeah, that makes sense. Although many times these disappearances happen over the Gulf Stream, the Coast Guard takes into account an object's drift when searching for any lost plane. Nevertheless, no trace has been found of any of the following aircraft that vanished over the waters. A Forney Aircoupe, spelled E-R-C-O-U-P-E, on December 6th, 1965, between Fort Lauderdale and West End, Grand Bahama. Again, on July 8th, 1968, a Cessna 180 between Grand Bahama and West Palm Beach, a flight distance of 65 or so miles. A Piper Comanche between Nassau and Opelika, Florida, near Miami, on January 17th, 1970. A Cessna 177 between Andros Island and Miami on March 20th, 1971, timed at 3:18 p.m. by an unqualified call for help. March 28th, 1973, a Cessna 172 after leaving West Palm Beach, Florida. A Navion A-16 on May 25th, 1973, between Freeport, Grand Bahama, and West Palm Beach. In this last disappearance, the pilot, Bob Corner, had been informed of thunderstorms on his route and was rerouted along with all of the other traffic, including a plane close behind. Amidst this traffic, he vanished without trace. How do these other pilots how do they not see this? They just don't see this whatsoever. He's there and then he's not there. Where'd he go? I don't know. Weren't you watching him? No, I wasn't watching him. I thought you were watching him. What if that happened? It's just like all of a sudden they're just gone. And none of them can explain it. Jeez. On August 10th, 1973, a beach bonanza disappeared between Fort Lauderdale and Marsh Harbor, Great Abaco, with 6 aboard. A Cessna 172 vanished on a coastal flight in the vicinity of Fort Lauderdale on July 28th, 1975, one of 2 that had vanished in less than 3 months. Previously, on May 2nd, a twin-engine Cessna Skymaster had vanished in the same area. Though weather records are scanty for some of these, and thus bad weather cannot be ruled out, an alarming possible cause might be gleaned from a disappearance in 1971 in nearby waters. Oh man. Alright, let's get through a few more paragraphs here. I have a map to show, but we'll get through a little more reading first. Yeah, Texas. Texas says it's so odd that it's always, quote, without trace, end quote. That's one of the most odd things of this whole thing. They're completely disappearing without any wreckage. Which gives me hope that these people might still be alive, because we're here like honoring their memory. They went missing. They don't know what happened to these people. There's like missing 411 over the ocean. Here's another one from Homestead Air Force Base, alright? More and more, as we go on with this series, it's bringing us right back into Tuesday's shows with the energy grid, Coral Castle, not even 5 miles away from Homestead Air Force Base. But let's continue reading here. Considerable official silence still surrounds the disappearance of Sting 27, a Phantom II jet fighter, September 10th, 1971. It was on a short, routine maneuver out of Homestead Air Force Base, south of Miami, where it took off at 8:05 a.m. Its last radar return was 8:22 a.m., 82 miles southeast. The jet was in a right turn after having come out of a Mach 1 speed. At this time, quote, blissful control, end quote, noticed Sting 27's SIF, selective identification feature, get weaker. Quote, Sting 27, your SIF feature is fading. We're having trouble identifying you. Is that you at the boundary of Alpha 6? Is that you at the boundary of Alpha 6? End quote. Lieutenant Norm Northrup, in training under Captain John Romero in the back seat, responded, quote, Roger, I am in a port turn at this time, end quote. Radar confirmed Northrup's message. Sting 27 turned left to a northerly heading, then right again. Quote, during the right turn, radar contact was lost at 8:22 a.m., end quote, states the report. This thing wasn't even up in the air for 20 minutes. 17 minutes after takeoff and it's gone. Despite other Phantoms in the area and the Coast Guard cutter Steadfast, and in parentheses here it says, which had earlier taken note of Sting 27 in the sky by 2 sonic booms as it exceeded Mach speed, end parentheses, no trace was found of the aircraft and no automatic alarm was detected. There it is again, Texas. Alright, this continues on here. The report on this disappearance is highly redacted. Even the standard summary sheet with its many questions and accompanying boxes has been subjected to a skilled razor. This extends even to the answer box for the question, quote, what type of accident? End quote. Usually the answer is, quote, missing/unknown, end quote, and does not require editing. However, at the back of the report there is a map showing Sting 27 at various points of its flight path. Among a number of boxes with arrows highlighting key parts of this path, there is a box reading, quote, suspected point of impact, end quote. Miles, according to the scale of the map, before a pinpointing arrow that leads to another box reading, quote, radar contact lost, end quote. This vague and overlooked point in the report intimating some form of collision or encounter in midair, adds alarming ramifications to an object seen by Sting 29 and Sting 30 when they were immediately vectored to the last radar spot. According to the report, only minutes after Sting 27 vanished, Sting 29 dropped down below to 1,500 feet to get a closer look at an area of disturbance, quote, end quote, in the ocean, and then described it in the words of the report as, quote, an area of water discoloration, oblong in shape, approximately 100 by 200 feet, with its axis running north-south. Its southern tip appeared to be below the surface, and the northern end appeared to be above. The report does not offer it as a, quote, UFO, end quote, or its submarine equivalent, quote, USO, end quote, for a gap takes the place of any Air Force opinion or clarification. The explanatory paragraph is neatly hacked out. So before we continue here, there's two different maps here, but this one pertains to Sting 27. This says this map is based on the official U.S. Air Force mishap report map showing Sting 27 at crucial points of its last moments. Quote, suspected point of impact, end quote, comes miles ahead of where Sting 27 finally vanished. What is it? This asks. Oh, man. Alright, hopefully this can be read. Yeah, you should be able to read it here. So we have the fading radar return. Get the Roger report turn. Roger, radar contact lost. You see where that's being pointed at. Steadfast 830 position. And then suspected point of impact. Up here we have the Homestead Air Force Base. I'll point to it here. Hold on. So it did a circle. So it flew off of Homestead Air Force Base. Flew a circle and then it said fuzzy radar return. Right here. Fading. Sorry, you said fuzzy. It's in my head. Fading radar return right here. You know what I could do? Just give me a second here. Make it a little bigger here. Much better. So we have Homestead Air Force Base. Bay of Florida there for reference. Flew down here, did a loop-de-loop. Then it said fading radar return. And Roger, port turn. And then I want to say that like just did a circle and disappeared. Or it started doing 2 circles, right? Because I can't see if that bottom part's connected or not. I think it just started doing like an S-curve thing at the bottom there. Because then radar contact lost is after that right side of suspected point of impact. If that makes any sense. And then we also have a full-page map. This is the busiest part of the triangle. Its southwest corner containing southern Florida, the Keys, and the exotic islands of the Bahamas and West Indies, spanning the distance between San Juan and Miami, the 2 radial hubs of traffic. So really, we're looking at up here with Bimini being the central point inside the triangle. But you see how this... There's a lot of islands over here. With Great Bahama having many islands as well. I mean, look at that top portion there. All those little dots. Even over here. Although that's this area, Great Eczema, Cat Island, not as important as dealing with Bimini here. How you guys feeling? We'll go a little longer here today. Okay, let's continue. Since an oil slick cannot be both above and below water, nor disperse cross current, these facts strongly suggest that this was not an oil slick, as the current, in this case, would have dispersed it northeastward. Adding to this deduction is that the Coast Guard cutter Steadfast was only 5 nautical miles away when Sting 30 signaled it to investigate. When it arrived shortly afterward, it found no trace of the, quote, discoloration, end quote. Moreover, this area was searched by sonar in order to find any trace of Sting 27 on the bottom to confirm its impact with the sea, but no trace was found in a 5 square mile grid search. Equally alarming circumstances surrounded the disappearance of Fighting Tiger 524 on February 22nd, 1978, while en route from NAS Oceana to the carrier USS Kennedy only 100 miles offshore. The pilot, Lieutenant Paul Smith, blurted, quote, "Stand by," end quote, followed moments later by the co-pilot, Lieutenant Richard Leonard, saying, quote, "Stand by, we have a problem right now," end quote. Hey Ivy, good to see you there in the chat. Good to see everyone saying hi as well. That's good. It's good. I like seeing you all say hi to each other. Moments later, the KA-6 attack bomber vanished from the Kennedy's radar scope, judged at only 30 miles distant. As soon as the, quote, "downed aircraft," end quote, symbol went up, the strike controller in CIC, or the Combat Information Center, noted a, quote, "raw radar return," end quote. Unlike the one received from the KA-6 attack bomber, this was devoid of any IFF, but was definitely a verified aircraft trail, or one might say in this case, an object trail, since it could not be definitely confirmed as the KA-6. This heading was completely different from the one the attack bomber had been on. In parentheses it says, they were last heading 270 degrees, being vectored for landing, end parentheses. This, quote, "raw radar return," end quote, appeared 12 miles southwest of Fighting Tiger's last position, heading 220 degrees. It lasted for a couple of minutes, but during this time neither Leonard nor Smith, if this was them, sent any clarifying message or answered repeated hails. This radar return then vanished from the scope. An extensive but fruitless search and thorough investigation could only produce the following opinion. And this is in a different font in the book here, so we'll go ahead and read this just now. It is evident that 2 minutes prior to AB 524's disappearance, the crew was having some difficulty or experiencing a minor emergency as revealed by the voice tape transcripts. Due to the lack of further radio transmissions, no hypothesis can be made as to the type or severity of the initial difficulty. It is suspected, however, that a catastrophic situation developed after the final radio transmission, and Lieutenant Smith and Lieutenant Leonard were incapable of coping with the situation. It is further believed that the crew did not attempt to eject, as the concurrent failure of both URT-33 beacon radios, in brackets it says automatic alarms triggered by ejection, was unlikely. Thus, this investigation concludes that a catastrophic emergency situation developed, incapacitated the crew to the point that they were unable to eject, and were subsequently lost at sea. So they went missing with the plane. Just like a lot of these. On April 27th, hold on. This incident was merely an unsettling foreshadowing of what was to come. In 1978, more aircraft disappeared in the Triangle than in any other year. Their courses varied. So did the types of aircraft that vanished. There seems to be no pattern except for the disturbing and already apparent one. On March 25th, 1978, a twin-engine Aero Commander 680 disappeared between Opelika, Florida, and Freeport, Grand Bahama. The aircraft was reported overdue by a client of the pilot, who had been waiting to inspect his boat on Grand Bahama with the intent of purchasing. The weather had been beautiful that day, with no hazards of any kind over the Bahamas. Wow. So he had a boat inspection planned and he ended up just disappearing. Plan canceled. On April 27th, 1978, a Piper Aerostar left Pompano Beach, Florida, with its pilot, Dr. Anthony Purcell, Purcell, en route to Panama City, Florida. Again, the weather provided no explanation for the disappearance. After it vanished from radar, a 5-second long auto alarm signal was picked up, but was abruptly silenced. Hours later, 2 more 2-second signals were heard, then silenced. These were not identified as coming from the Aerostar, or from any plane for that matter, and their origin remains unexplained. Oh, this is some new stuff we're learning here. Let me read this again. After it vanished from radar, a 5-second long auto alarm signal was picked up, but was abruptly silenced. Hours later, 2 more 2-second signals were heard, then silenced. Like something stopping their automatic alarm system from beaconing? And then 2 other signals came in and also got silenced a similar way? It says these were not identified as coming from the Aerostar, or from any plane for that matter, and their origin remains unexplained. So what was sending the signal out? While the search for the Aerostar was underway, a Cessna 172 disappeared in unusual circumstances on April 30th, 1978, en route to Daytona Beach. So this is only 3 days later. The crew of a fishing smack noticed an airplane overhead fighting power loss, its engine sputtering and skipping. Despite this, the plane continued on without making any attempt to contact the vessel, even by visual means. That's strange. You'd think these people would, if they knew that their engine was not working, they would try to get help in any way possible. This and its steady course, plus abundance of a radio mayday, or plus absence of a radio mayday, suggested to the crew that the pilot may no longer have been aboard. That's an interesting observation. So let's say these people are disappearing from the planes before the planes are like crashing and going down, right? But we're not finding debris of any of these planes. But some of them, they find these planes that have nobody inside them and the cockpit's locked. So like they didn't eject out of the plane to save their lives. They just disappeared inside the cockpit is what I'm taking from this. I'll reread this part really briefly, and then we'll get through a few more of these, and then we'll call it for today. The crew of a fishing smack noticed an airplane overhead fighting power loss, its engine sputtering and skipping. Despite this, the plane continued on without making any attempt to contact the vessel, even by visual means. This and its steady course, plus absence of a radio mayday, suggested to the crew that the pilot may no longer have been aboard. This unusual scenario, implying a derelict aircraft, has been noted in other sightings of aircraft that were later reported missing. This plane had left Dillon, South Carolina, with George Hotelling, that's spelled Hotelling, a pilot of considerable experience. The plane continued on until out of sight and sound. No trace was ever found of it. So are we experienced, like, are these people witnessing, let's say the fishermen, they're witnessing a plane that already has had somebody that was piloting it vanish, but the plane's still there, but it's struggling. There's no mayday, there's no attempt by the plane to get the attention of the boaters. And then once it's out of sight and sound, it just, no one ever finds it. Are these fishermen and boaters, are they seeing like a transitional time of the plane where the engine is starting to get knocked out, but then I'm just saying, I say they, whatever it is that's making these planes disappear, is it disabling the planes while it's in the air? And that's what the boat was seeing, and it already made the pilots vanish, but the plane's still there. And then once the plane got out of view, then the plane vanishes too. And no debris is ever found. For the most part. We found, like earlier in this chapter today, we were reading just a landing wheel was found off of one of these military planes. That's it. And it was carrying over like 200,000 pounds of cargo plus fuel combined. It was May 19th, 1978, when a Piper Cherokee Aero 3 with 4 persons aboard disappeared between Fort Pierce, Florida and Nassau, Bahamas. As part of the investigation, the local flight service unit went over a recording of Lon Amason, spelled Amason, the pilot, in conversation with the radio operator about weather fronts and scattered thunderstorms, in which the operator informed him of a large break in the weather near his position. Amason's last words were, quote, "Affirmative. I see a spot here just about due east of my position. It's clear through there." End quote. Andreas says 2 other signals from the past or dimensions where taken crafts were before being cut off. It's like targeting or focusing on organic material, us humans first, then inorganic, the planes, subs, boats. Yes! Yes, Andreas. You get what I'm trying to say with that. The 2 other signals being cut off in that situation doesn't necessarily say it's from the planes. It could be from whatever's making these planes and people disappear. And exactly what Andreas is saying. It's like they're focusing on organic material first, before then on the inorganic of the planes, subs, and the boats. Beautifully said. I think we're getting somewhere with that. On May 26, 1978 at 4 p.m., a Beach Queen Air departed Port-au-Prince, Haiti, on a short 45-minute trip to nearby Providenciales Island in the Bahamas. The weather was perfect. 13 minutes after takeoff, the pilot made his last radio contact, saying all was well. On July 18th, 1978, a large twin-engine charter Piper Navajo left Santa Marta, Colombia for Port-au-Prince with 2 pilots and disappeared over the Caribbean. Among the disappearances in 1978, one of the most remarkable happened to Argosy Flight 902, that's spelled Argosy, Argosy, Flight 902, a DC-3 charter airliner south of the Florida Keys. On September 21st, the pilot, George Hamilton, obtained U.S. permission for a flight to Havana in order to pick up 21 U.S. citrus growers on tour there. He and his co-pilot, Pete Rustenberg, were accompanied by his wife, Barbara Hamilton, and a friend, Pauline Lowe, who acted as stewardess. Shortly after takeoff from Fort Lauderdale, Rustenberg contacted Miami with his typical levity. Quote, "This is Pete Rustenberg of Argosy Flight 902. We'll be going to Havana, Cuba, and I'd like to get the weather along the route and all the goodies if I could, please." End quote. The reply was for fair weather along the course. When the DC-3 departed the area of the Keys and headed south to Havana, it began to experience hazy radio communications. A presentiment of disaster, as we have seen in other losses. After about 15 minutes of this, Havana picked them up loud and clear and tracked them on radar. The last sweep of their scope at 12:43 p.m. showed Argosy 902 making a slight turn to the right of course. The next sweep, the scope was blank. This is a little different here. Miami and Havana coordinated an immediate search. U.S. Air Force and U.S. Coast Guard units raced to the scene, while the Cuban Air Patrol made overflights within the first hour. By afternoon, the Coast Guard cutter Steadfast was coordinating the surface effort. The search was expanded to all traffic, plus 4 more cutters, a helicopter, and a C-131 with the following cable. Quote, "All shipping straits of Florida Nicholas Channel Argosy Airlines FLT, Flight 902, and in parentheses N407D, is overdue on a flight from Fort Lauderdale to Havana, Cuba. Description: white with blue trim, 4 persons on board. All ships are requested to keep a sharp lookout for debris. Yellow life jackets, people in the water. Signed, U.S. Coast Guard, Miami, Florida." End quote. So I'm going to go back up here a bit. So it says, when the DC-3 departed the area of the Keys and headed south to Havana, it began to experience hazy radio communications. But then after about 15 minutes of that, Havana picked them out loud and clear and tracked them on radar, and then one sweep of the scope and it was gone. After hearing them loud and clear. So it's like looking down at this one to the left here, this orange one. One full clockwise sweep. And it's gone with the next update. Because that's normally how this radar scan works. There were 32 yellow life jackets on board Flight 902. The blue-gray seat cushions were the floatable kind. On September 24th, the search was discontinued with negative results. Wow. The DC-3 also carried an ELT, or an emergency locator transmitter. But as in many other disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle, no transmission was ever received. Hey Zen Ray, good to see you in the chat. We got a good crowd here right now. Thank you. I'll keep going here as long as I can. But if I could wrap it up with this one account, I think that'll be good. Because it's going on for quite a bit here. And we still got 10 pages of the chapter left. Which I would like to keep that for another show. Because we're almost hitting 2 hours here. Comment on radio and television was lively. Comment on radio and television was lively and up to the minute. At one point, it excited one erratic mind to call up the UPI, or the United Press International, in Miami. Invent a terrorist organization of which no one had heard, then claim responsibility for blowing up Argosy Flight 902. What a piece of shit. Man, what an asshole. They say there's excited one erratic mind. Yeah, this dude was a psycho. Trying to take claim for a disappearance that he had nothing to do with. Then claim responsibility for blowing up Argosy Flight 902 before abruptly hanging up. Although little credence is usually given such calls, the authorities followed up this one and found it to lack credibility. Anyway, if the DC-3 had blown up, it would have scattered debris over a fairly wide territory. Something that would not have gone unnoticed during the search. In addition, Argosy 902 would not have turned to the right of its course before a surprise explosion. Every available fact about Argosy 902 only leads to improbable suppositions. If the airplane had exploded, this would explain why it vanished from the radar scope. On the other hand, debris would have also been found scattered over a wide territory. If it plummeted to the sea, for whatever reason, the blinding impact and explosion would have scattered debris everywhere as well. Okay. We will read 2 more pages here, and we'll call it. Because this continues on more and more. So, like, these paragraphs, they're written really well by Quasar here. Because he's able to weave in all of these disappearances along with how they disappeared and the time frames. Like, he's cataloged all of this really well in this book. So if the Argosy 902 incident is hard to believe, less than 2 months later, a twin-engine, 10-seat Piper Chieftain charter aircraft vanished in even more alarming circumstances. Caribbean Flight 912 disappeared at 7:19 p.m. while coming in for a landing at Harry S. Truman Airport in St. Thomas. Its last position off the runway was clearly marked by radar and by visual confirmation by the air traffic controller, William A. Kittinger, Kittinger, who estimated it to be within 2 miles of the runway. The landing light was clearly visible as a bright and steady beam. At this moment, Kittinger remembers he looked down at the radar scope to make sure a Heron DH-114 was taking off all right. To his surprise, he noticed the radar scope was blank, except for the Heron, climbing to altitude. He immediately did a double take back out the tower window and saw no more landing light. Urgent radio calls went unanswered, and he declared an emergency. So the landing light went out? Dang. That's not good. The search began within minutes when Kittinger redirected a Cessna 172 on approach to search the area. This was followed up by a thorough 4-day-long Coast Guard search. Oh, hold on a second. We're hearing something a lot different here. I'm going back up. I'm glad we're going back and looking at this stuff. Its last position off the runway was clearly marked by radar and by visual confirmation of the air traffic controller, Kittinger, who estimated it to be within 2 miles of the runway. So it was coming into land. The landing light was clearly visible as a bright and steady beam. At this moment, Kittinger remembers he looked down at the radar scope to make sure a Heron DH-114 was taking off all right. And to his surprise, he noticed the radar scope was blank except for the Heron climbing the altitude. So he was checking on another plane and then noticed that Caribbean Flight 912 disappeared while it was coming in for a landing, and it was within sight. He immediately did a double take back out the tower window and saw no more landing light. Urgent radio calls went unanswered, and he declared an emergency. So I guess he did the radio calls. Like, he called onto the plane to be like, hey, you still there? You still coming in? We don't see you anymore. The search began within minutes when Kittinger redirected a Cessna 172 on approach to search the sea. This was followed up by a thorough 4-day-long Coast Guard search. Despite the Chieftain's last position being less than 2 miles from the runway, the search found no trace of it. Unreal. The mystery of Flight 912 grows more complicated. The Chieftain had ample radio equipment, which was working only minutes before. The pilot, Irving C. Rivers, the sole occupant, was a charter pilot with more than 5,000 flight hours. Thank you, been YouTubing. I'll check this chat real quick here. Andreas says inorganic seemed to slip past the mist or barrier and can be seen at times, but never the organic. Yeah, the radar doesn't pick up organic for some reason. And then Zen Ray says, David Polites, I'm missing 411, always says carry a locator beacon on you before repo going into the woods. I guess that wouldn't work then, according to this information. No, the black box just does nothing. Like, you can carry a locator beacon with you, but the beacon will disappear too. Been YouTubing says, I really like these Bermuda Triangle episodes. Keep up the good work, Mr. Yissilmissil. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, I enjoy doing this series. We're finding out so much information that really I don't hear anywhere else. It's all contained in these books, and this is from many years of research these authors did to compile all this information. And I'm thankful to be able to present all of this to you and have this discussion here. Because, like, we're finding out new, like, ways to think about what these disappearances mean. I like getting all of this, this data set, like, all these different data sets, and looking at the patterns and seeing what's repeating. And then there's the outliers, the stuff that doesn't repeat, like that radio. Like, imagine having your emergency signal, mayday, mayday, something jams it. What is jamming that signal? And then for it to have two more signals after that, and then having similar jammings, it's almost like that was a decoy signal to throw off whoever was at air traffic control, to be like, oh no, it's just an anomaly. See, it happened over here too. No, that almost seems like an intentional second broadcast with jammings to mask that first one. But it just makes it more unusual. It seems like there's an intelligence behind it. Am I wrong? Okay, let's continue reading here. We got one more page left, and we're going to call it a day. The pilot, Sir Irving C. Rivers, the sole occupant, was a charter pilot with more than 5,000 flight hours. He had just taken off from nearby St. Croix to come pick up passengers. There is no hint of pilot fatigue or pilot error. The aircraft also carried an ELT, yet no signal was received. So again, what Gian J was saying in the chat, the transmitter's not going to do anything for these people disappearing. So before we move too far onto this next page, it says the radar scope readings as taken by the NTSB report, the X shows the last position of Caribbean Flight 912 in relation to the runway. So what we'll do here is we will stop this slideshow. We'll bring this up. Just give me a second. All right. So we have a little diagram here that shows the runway that this plane was supposed to go down. There's the route of the flight where it should have gone towards, and then the radar antenna. So the radar antenna was right in front of them. They were supposed to make a right-hand turn. At least that's what it appears like to me. Okay, we're on our last page for today. Thank you all for being here. We have like 3 or 4 paragraphs, and then we will take a break, because this is still chapter 2. We still have like 9 more pages of chapter 2 here of the vanished planes. So we'll save that for next week to continue this on, because I'm starting to feel it here. But I will wrap up this page for all you. So we were talking about this next approach. This was okay, let's back up a little bit. The mystery of Flight 912 grows more complicated. The Chieftain had ample radio equipment, which was working only minutes before. The pilot, Irving C. Rivers, the sole occupant, was a charter pilot with more than 5,000 flight hours. He had just taken off from nearby St. Croix to come pick up passengers. There is no hint of pilot fatigue or pilot error. The aircraft also carried an ELT, yet no signal was received. This exact scenario had played itself out before at St. Thomas. On February 10th, 1974, a Pilatus Briton Norman Islander, quote, signaled approach, failed to arrive St. Thomas, end quote, at 7:31 p.m. as the official brief so briefly summarizes. In parentheses here it says, earlier that same day, another odd disappearance happened in the Triangle, near the Bahamian island of Great Abaco, after a Cessna 414, with only the pilot on board, left the port of Treasure Cay. End parentheses. A fruitless search lasting several days in both locations failed to find a clue. In 1982, a charter Navajo vanished near St. Thomas in familiar circumstances. It left nearby Anguilla, that's spelled Anguilla. Anguilla? Is it Anguilla? I think that's how it's pronounced. October 20th, and headed for St. Thomas. A complete search failed to locate a trace of the Navajo N777AA, or its complement of 8 persons and luggage. In a disturbing encore, 8 aircraft utterly vanished in 1979. Most of these were over the Bahamas and in and about the nearby islands. Only one pilot sent a message to indicate they had encountered trouble. The pilot's amount of experience was very good to excellent. No trace was found of any of them, despite well-coordinated searches. I'm going to check the chat here real quick. Alright, Texas. Thank you. Texas Learning's heading out. Thank you for the kind words. Zenray says, not necessarily off subject. However, I get a feeling this is all connected to Project Paperclip. And he says, I wonder if the pilots were German. A lot of Germans go missing in the 411. In the missing 411. Yeah, Zen's talking about the David Paulides. If you haven't heard about that, just look up Missing 411. It's a very excellent project that a former police officer is doing, looking for missing people. To answer your question, Zenray, I don't think it is limited to German pilots. Because this... Man, now I can't remember what... it said Flight 19 was like the most notorious here. But Flight 19 was not the first disappearance. It was like the most well-known of the aircraft. And before that, there were the boats. All the boats that went missing. And that goes back to the 1800s, even earlier than that, I think, if I recall correctly. So, from what we're understanding here, this Bermuda Triangle phenomenon is... it's not being picky with which planes it's going to take or make disappear. And it has something to do with the land location. So it's not like this is starting to happen inland on the East Coast. All of a sudden, all these planes in New York are disappearing. Nothing like that. But we are getting these planes that have clear signals being transmitted to New York when they're supposed to be closer to Miami. And if they were, in fact, over by New York, they would not be able to transmit that far to Miami. So something's happening with displacement on multiple levels. We got one more paragraph here, and we'll call it for today. These aircraft included a Beechcraft Musketeer with pilot Roy Ziegler, a professional airplane mechanic, and his friend Brian Fines. It was last heard over the Yissilmissil on January 11th. So I stopped because I'm trying to understand what we're reading about. Yeah, this is the 1979 Disturbing Encore, as the book says. So one of these included the Beechcraft Musketeer with these two guys. It was last heard from over the Yissilmissil on January 11th. In this same general location, Jim Catron, spelled Catron, was last heard from in his twin-engine Beech E-18S while en route from Fort Lauderdale to Cat Island on April 2nd. On April 24th, a Piper Cherokee signaled it was turning around while only about 5 miles off at Fort Lauderdale. The radio transmission was suddenly poor. The pilot stated no reason. In parentheses, it says, though a rain shower was beginning. It then vanished from the scope. Along the short route between St. Croix and St. Thomas, a Cessna 150 went missing on June 30th. You know, I wonder if the author decided to put that in, that a rain shower was beginning. Because it does seem like weather kind of moves in when these phenomenon, when this happens with these disappearances, the weather changes. It does that with the national parks, with the David Paulides missing 411, where there's just like a cloud that moves in and then disappears the people along with these craft. But we're having accounts here where it's clear, it's sunny, and these planes are still disappearing. Along the short route between St. Croix and St. Thomas, a Cessna 150 went missing on June 30th. On October 4th, 1979, an Aero Commander 500 left Andros Island for West Palm Beach and was last seen passing Bimini. A twin Piper Aztec left Montego Bay, Jamaica, bound for Nassau, Bahamas on October 27th. It never arrived. Comparatively, a comparatively crowded route lay below the flight track of a Beech twin Bonanza that disappeared November 19th, 1979, while en route from Delray Beach to Key West, Florida. The pilot, Jack Houston, was planning to scuba dive in the Keys. Another Aztec disappeared December 21st, 1979, bound for Caicos from Anguilla, with 4 persons aboard. So even on a crowded flight path, going to somewhere where the pilot was going to plan to scuba dive, he disappears too. That's nuts. So that is a very good point to end today's show on. Just to show you, we are now on page 42 of this book. We're only on chapter 2 though. There's about 300 pages in this book. It's like 280, 264, 261. So we're getting there. We got some weeks ahead to get through. But for now, like, we're focused on getting these missing planes covered in chapter 2. Let me check the chat again here before I do my final thoughts. Zenray says, I see. I think you're right on that. Thank you, because the 1800s definitely predates Project Paperclip and World War II. Andreas says, Holy Mother of God, that is insane for a book. Yes, I know, man. It's a big book. We're on chapter 2, and we still got all that to go. It's a 300-page book, roughly. But it's the most comprehensive book since the 1974 Charles Berlitz book that we covered prior on this same deep dive series. This is the I keep forgetting the wording for it. It's the spiritual predecessor to Charles Berlitz. This is in 30 years after Charles Berlitz's book from 74. And they're just covering now, like what you heard here today. We're just getting into the late 70s disappearances. But that's from 20 years ago. And some of this stuff might not even be available at, like, some of these records from like 1968 and prior have been wiped. So stuff that's in the Charles Berlitz book, that's probably all that's left for reports. And then you have to consider that it's the year 2025 and that this book's 21 years old now. So this is 30 years after the 74 book, but we still have 21 years after this book of disappearances that we might have to manually go and put together a collage of all of these different missing people and disappearances of planes and boats from 2004 to present. And if anything, we'll do something where it's like the top 10, top 20 most prolific over the past 21 years. Because I'm sure there's hundreds, if not thousands, that have occurred since then. And we're talking in that number of people as well. Probably more people than that, because a lot of times these planes have more than one person on them. Alright, so this is going to be it for today. I thank you all for being here. This was an earlier show. We moved it from Thursday to Wednesday, but we kept it at 6 p.m. And It's now 2.5 hours. So I didn't plan on going this long today. But it is a long chapter of chapter 2 with the missing planes. But that'll be it for today. I really appreciate you all being here. Make sure to drop a like before you head out. And feel free to comment on the video after it's live, after we end the transmission. But until the next one, class dismissed.